Okay, workplace politics and creativity. Well, you might have seen the blurb that we talked about, that I've put about this talk. And the blurb says, work teams often contain negative gossip and or power politics. How do we keep calm, operate maturely and avoid being sucked in? And the answer is, swapping our reactive minds for creative minds, taking a principled approach to others. Okay? That's the talk. That's the main bit that I'm going to be talking about. But how do we do that, saddharaja? That is the question that's probably framing itself in your minds at the moment. So it's the autumn now. We're moving into the autumn season. We can see Christmas. A couple of months ago it was the summer. You remember the summer? You know, lots of rain and cold. Do you remember that? Well, I went on a holiday, a long distance walking holiday with my partner, saddharaja. We walked the South Downs Way from Hassocks all the way to Eastbourne. And it was very beautiful. The weather was really lovely. Long walks along the coast, along the cliffs, sunshine, B&Bs, all that kind of thing. It was very lovely. Except for day two. Day two was really freakish. It was really strange. The wind was incredibly strong and the rain was just completely horizontal. It was the worst possible day of the year to be out walking. So we had to go, we got togged up and we were walking along the edge of the cliff and it was blowing us around like this, blowing us around the wind. We had to hold on to each other because we were getting blown about in different directions by the wind and all this rain. It was awful actually. And by lunchtime we just said, oh, let's forget this. So we went to a pub and had lunch. And then there were lots of other walkers there doing the same thing. And we took the bus into Lewes, which is a lovely little old town in Sussex. And we ended up going to Anne of Cleves' house. We went to this Tudor house belonging to the National Trust. And that was a lovely place. Anne of Cleves' house. It was very beautiful. We had a look round it. It was a lot better than walking around in horizontal rain. And so there we were. Very, very old. And it turned out that Anne of Cleves was the fourth wife of the infamous Henry VIII. And he didn't actually behead her. He sort of divorced her and pensioned her off in Anne of Cleves' house in Lewes, of all places. And it was quite interesting. And it kind of reinvigorated my interest in the Tudor dynasty. There she is, Anne of Cleves. That was her. Yeah, she was the fourth wife of Henry VIII. Yeah, so they were only married for about 2 weeks apparently, and you know nothing kind of happened. So he didn't like her really. Anyway, so I thought I'd sort of say something about the House of Tudor. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the House of Tudor this morning. If you don't know much about the House of Tudor, well, here's the complete works of the House of Tudor in 5 minutes. Okay, the complete guide to the House of Tudor in 5 minutes. So the House of Tudor, this is the emblem of the House of Tudor, the Tudor Rose. Yeah, there's a very good restaurant in Mill Road actually called the Tudor Rose, and it's got that emblem. They do very good breakfasts. And the House of Tudor, let me see, what does it say? Well, it was a European royal house that lasted from 1485 to 1603, over 100 years, and it was Welsh in origin. And there were 5 monarchs. There was Henry VII, Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. Yeah, a lot of dramatic events happened during the reign of the House of Tudor. England became a Protestant country, changed from being a Catholic to a Protestant country. The other big dramatic event was also the defeat of the Spanish Armada in the English Channel by Sir Francis Drake. You probably all know this. Every school child knows this. So I'm going to say something about some of the characters, the monarchs of the Tudor dynasty, because, well, they were quite interesting characters. One of the prominent features of the Tudor era was power play, plotting, intrigue, and an awful lot of executions. Yeah, an awful lot of executions. It's what we would now call challenging behaviour. Yeah, there was a lot of challenging behaviour in the Tudor era. Yeah, not all the monarchs were like this, but most of them were quite a lot of the time. So let's have a look. So we've got Henry VII. He was the first, and actually he wasn't that bad. Actually, he was okay. He restored the country's finances. We were in quite a mess. Actually, restored them all. He only went to war twice, which was pretty good going, actually. And he kind of restored things with France and with Scotland. Yeah, made peace with Scotland. Not an easy task. And he did that. His main crime, it seems, was that he was very dull. He was a very dull person. Yeah, even his family and his friends said he was dull. Even he admitted that he was dull. That was his main crime. But actually, he wasn't a bad bloke, really, all in all. So that was Henry VII. But then after him came along Henry VIII. Yeah, I think we all know who that is. The infamous Henry VIII. Well, what can I say? What can I say about Henry VIII? There's so much that has been said. I think most people know that he was married 6 times and that he executed 2 of his wives. Yeah, the first one was Catherine of Aragon. He divorced her pretty quickly. There was Anne Boleyn, who he took her to the Tower of London and chopped off her head. There was Jane Seymour, who died in childbirth. There was Anne of Cleves, the one I've mentioned, where he just divorced her and pensioned her off. Catherine Howard, he executed her as well. And then finally we had Catherine Parr, who survived him. So this is how we used to remember it when I was at school. We used to say, divorced, executed, died, divorced, executed, survived. That was the sequence of all his wives, yeah? And he ruled with absolute power. Yeah, he was a despot, he was a tyrant, he was an absolute monarch, and he had a very, very big ego. Yeah, you disagreed with Henry VIII at your peril. Yeah, and he changed this country's religion from Catholic to Protestant for quite superficial reasons, really. Completely changed history for quite superficial reasons. He was an egomaniac with low self-esteem and anger management problems. He was a monarch who treated women very, very badly, and men not much better, actually. He was unnecessarily cruel, and he would put you to death at a moment's notice just because he didn't like you. He did have some good qualities as well, but for those around him, they were quite hard to see, I think, because of the way that he was. Anyway, might say a little bit more about him later. Next up, after he died, oh yes, he was morbidly obese, and they now think they know why he died when he did. But he did have a son called Edward VI, and he was 9 when he came to the throne. He was only 9, and he died aged 16. And you think, well, what could he do? He's only a kid. Didn't know what he was doing. But actually, he was a little tyrant. He was just like his father. He was a little tyrant. He invaded Scotland and he tried to make them become Protestant, and they didn't want to be. And just to sort of spite the Cornish, he went down to Cornwall. Sorry, Peter, is he here? Yeah, he actually, I'm afraid to say, he slaughtered 1 in 10 of the population of Cornwall because they wouldn't become Protestant. He was quite a bad lad, actually. He was quite bad. And it got so bad that by the time he was 15, he had to be removed from power because he was making such a mess. Fortunately, he got ill and died shortly afterwards, which was a big relief to everybody. And then I'm afraid things got from bad to worse. We then had Mary the First, and you think, well, you know, what could she have done? But it was terrible under Mary the First because the country had become Protestant, and now she said, oh no, I want it all to become Catholic again. And so she married Philip of Spain, who was a Catholic. Unfortunately, he didn't like her either in that sort of way, and she didn't have an heir, and she became very bitter. And she had a thing about Protestants, and she burned to death so many Protestants, thousands and thousands of Protestants all over the country, that she became known as Bloody Mary, and she developed the art of torture. She even considered executing her own sister, Elizabeth I, so there was no love lost between those two. And finally, in the Tudor dynasty, we had Elizabeth I, who was actually quite a good queen. She was actually all right. She restored the nation's finances. She defeated the Armada. She never married, but she kind of sorted things out in the UK. And, well, she didn't leave an heir, so that was the end of the Tudor dynasty as it was. She did actually put to death Mary, Queen of Scots, but she kind of had to. It was a very complex and difficult situation, and she didn't want to do it. She didn't want to do that. She did rule with fairness, and she introduced something called the Poor Law, which is the beginnings of social security in this country. The Poor Law. Yeah, very interesting, isn't it? There's more. Just a few more quickly. There was also Thomas Cromwell. He was a kind of prime minister, really. They didn't really have a prime minister, but he was the main man in those days, and he was very powerful and very dark. Very powerful and dark. He ruled everybody was scared of Thomas Cromwell, but he was also very, very clever. He just made things happen for Henry VIII. Unfortunately, his one mistake he made was he arranged the marriage to Anne of Cleves, and Henry was not happy with that, and he executed him. And afterwards, a year later, he realised he'd made a big mistake because things were going really badly in the country without Thomas. So he said, "I've executed the greatest servant I ever had." He was quite regretful, actually. And last of all, you had Cardinal Wolsey from Ipswich. And if Thomas Cromwell was the kind of action, Cardinal Wolsey was the advice for Henry VIII. Though he purported to be a cardinal and was high up in the church, really he was very worldly indeed. His spirituality was a sham. It was a sham. He basically organised everything. He was the power behind the throne. Unfortunately, he got things wrong as well. He wasn't able to obtain a divorce for Henry from the Pope. And so he was going to be executed as well. But on his way to the execution, he died of a heart attack. So, there you go. That's the Tudor dynasty. And in 5 minutes, probably more like 10 minutes. And, well, this little piece of English history illustrates a particular world. Yeah, it's admittedly quite an extreme world, but it's a world of plots and intrigue, of uncertainty and suspicion, an age when British subjects of all classes rarely ever felt free of fear or felt safe. Yeah, it was an age of ostentatious status displays, yeah, of lavish banquets and entertainments, and which bankrupted the nation's finances. Yeah. So Henry VIII built 55 castles and palaces during his reign, which the country could not afford. But one of the things he did do is he built King's College Chapel in Cambridge, so you can still go in that today. He finished that off. But also it was an age of sexual intrigue and double standards. It was an age of war, invasions, and serial executions of queens, chief ministers, and anyone who remotely stepped out of line. It was an age of religious confusion, intolerance, and fanaticism, an age where the monarch's subjects may be required to change religion at a moment's notice. Yeah, so it's all great stuff for a TV drama series, isn't it? Yeah, the Tudors. The Tudors. Did anybody see it? Anybody see the Tudors? Quite interesting. It's a bit sort of sexed up, as they say, but quite interesting. The Tudors. Yeah. So I watched the Tudors, and well, there is a positive side to the Tudors, of course. Many good things happened during that time, and I recommend the books of Alison Weir, the historian, if you want to know more about the Tudors, or the novels of C.J. Sampson, the Shard Lake series. They give you a real insight into what life was really like. So why I'm talking about all this to you, this might be you might be wondering this at the moment, is that it is an extreme example of a particular realm, a particular world that really did exist. And it illustrates the human world of power, plotting, manipulation, intrigue and power play, all mixed up with sexual scandal and religion, which is quite a kind of powerful mix, isn't it? So all this was hundreds of years ago, but that world hasn't gone away. It's still with us. Today, UK and Europe are quite different countries. They're better places. They're ruled with governments which are fair. They're ruled with just laws, a liberal democracy, and respect for human rights. Yeah, we can't do that kind of thing anymore. Elizabeth II, our current Queen of England, if she doesn't like you, if she meets you, she doesn't execute you anymore or take you to the Tower of London. Yeah, if she meets you and she doesn't like you, she just says, ew. Ew. I've personally never met the Queen, but I have met Prince Philip, her husband. Though I came from the working classes, my father actually worked for Prince Philip for several years and for a short time. And I was once required, aged 12, to help with a barbecue, which he was supposed to be attending. I was working away doing the sausages, and Prince Philip stuck his head round the door and said, "Are there any more sausages going?" So that really happened. So that's what the monarchy is like today. But nonetheless, power play and gossip, they're all still with us, yeah? Manipulative behaviour, scandal in our governments and public institutions, our businesses and charities, our multinational companies, our social institutions, yeah? It's all still there, isn't it? Phone hacking, MPs' expenses scandals, jobs for the boys, yeah, the Whitehall rumour mill, it's all there, isn't it? Sometimes we're shocked by it, but mostly we're not. We've seen it all, haven't we? We've seen so much of this sort of thing. We're used to it, and we're not that interested, probably. And here we are at Windhorse Evolution. We're trying to get away from all that sort of thing. We're trying to move away. We're trying to live in a different kind of world from this world of power play and politics. Yeah, there might be a little bit of kind of cut and thrust goes on at Windhorse Evolution occasionally, but mostly it's pretty good, isn't it? We don't really engage in politics very much at work, I don't think. My own first experience of politics at work was when I was 17, the infamous slate quarry that I worked in. I'd only been there about 2 weeks, and there's about 40 men worked on this big slate cutting plant, this quarry, and it became clear that there were 2 football teams there that people supported, local teams, Carlisle United and Barrow FC. And there was a local derby happening on the Saturday, and it was very, very serious. People all had their scarves on, and people were roughly divided into the 2 kinds of supporters. And I just wasn't saying who I supported. And it reached quite ahead where my boss came up to me and said, "Look, we need to know where you stand." "Come on, Richard, we need to know. Are you a Carlisle United supporter or are you a Barrow FC? We need to know." It was quite serious. I said, "Well, actually, I'm a Carlisle supporter." He said, "What?" And I could see his lip sort of curl a bit like Elvis Presley, it just sort of curled. And I knew then that our relationship wasn't going to go well. This is how it was. And it was a hard lesson for a 17-year-old. So, let's move on to workplace politics and ask ourselves, well, what are they? What is workplace politics? What does it consist of? Well, I've got a definition from a social commentator, quite a well-known one, called Marian Haidt. And she says, "It is simply how power gets worked out on a practical day-to-day basis at work." That's her definition. What she also says is the components of workplace politics are firstly rivalry. Yeah, that's where opposing departments or individuals or teams kind of try and vie against each other in a competitive, negatively competitive way, sometimes called turf wars. Yeah. Second component is power play and status. Yeah. This is where members of the workplace, relate to each other on the basis of authority or power or position. Yeah. Not as human beings or Sangha members, and or they get a kick out of being of an apparently higher position than other people. Thirdly, there's gossip and sexual scandal. So this is where you get satisfaction from discussing the private business or misfortunes or sexual lives of others within the workplace. And fourthly, you've got manipulation, and that's what they call string pulling. That's where you're trying to manipulate somebody in the workforce. You're trying to maneuver them in order to get some kind of advantage for yourself or your team. What an unpleasant set of habits. What a horrible set of habits that is, those four things. And the root, of course, of workplace politics is underneath it manipulation. You're trying to get some kind of payoff for you or your team. Yeah, it might be promotion or status. It might be getting a network of allies. Usually it's some kind of greater control or power that you want. And it causes a lot of problems in the workforce. Yeah, it undermines morality. Morale, I should say, within the workforce. People feel quite undermined by it, and it wastes time on the company's resources in this kind of way. It blocks the flow of information that goes back and forth within the business, and it reduces the effectiveness of the business. And also it stifles leadership, and spiritually it's completely unskillful and immature behaviour. So another great example of workplace politics, where it all kind of seems to have stemmed from, is this man actually. Yeah, this man. It looks quite okay, doesn't he? Really? No, he doesn't look like you, saddharaja. It looks quite good. Really. He's called Niccolo Machiavelli. It all started with him. He wrote the book on workplace politics. He kicked the whole thing off, really. He coined the term, the end justifies the means. And he was a philosopher and writer during the Italian Renaissance. And he was quite a clever guy, and he did a lot of good things. But he wrote a set of books called The Art of War, and the second one is called The Prince. And these are the books. This is your instruction manual for workplace politics. A lot of people refer to it, and these days, even now, we talk about operating in a Machiavellian kind of way, don't we? Well, that's where it all comes from. Niccolo Machiavelli, he was the Saruman, he was the Darth Vader of the Italian Renaissance. He was the Baron, the Dark Lord, and he was the person, the end justifies the means. Machiavelli. Coming up to modern day culture, because that's quite a long time ago. Arthur Priya mentioned The Office, yeah, and some of you may have seen this series. I've actually only probably watched about 2 episodes, and I'd had enough after 2 episodes. David Brent, the manager of Werner Hogg Paper Company, yeah, where life is stationary. Yeah, Werner Hogg, where life is stationary. He's got it. Think about it. And there's the team. There they all are. Tim, Donna, Karen, Alex, Glyn, Malcolm. There they all are. If anybody's ever seen any of that, it's a very particular form of humour. Doesn't really suit me. It's too cynical for me, and I don't like cynicism. But yeah, it's actually a very, very popular programme. I've discovered that it's actually been exported and remade in the USA, Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, China, Germany, Brazil and Israel. Have all got their own version of The Office. Isn't that interesting? And I think what's sad about it really, I think, is that it provides a form of release, of outlet for people, humour, because a lot of people are suffering from workplace politics. themselves in all over the world. It's going on all over the world. Here's a couple of typical quotes from David Brent. Here we go. Those of you who think you know everything are annoying to those of us who actually do. I thought I could see light at the end of the tunnel, but it was just some fool with a torch bringing me more work. So that's the kind of thing it is. And it serves a purpose, but it's also a particular world. So you might want to have a look at that. I don't know. It's up to you. The opposite, of course, of workplace politics is, well, it's a truly human workforce, isn't it? Full of dignity and respect. Yeah, a human and caring environment. Yeah, satisfying work, an opportunity to learn and develop, and to take more responsibility if that's what you want to do. Somewhere where you're accepted and appreciated. Yeah, it's also an equal opportunities environment. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, what colour or race or background you come from, you're welcome and treated as an equal. And it's a workplace where you can actually practice the Dharma, if that's what you want to do. You could make your work your spiritual practice. And also, finally, it's somewhere where you can be yourself. A lot of people in the workplace aren't able to be themselves and who they really are. They have to put a mask on and try being something that they're not quite. And when they get home, they feel they can be themselves. But a good workforce, I think, is somewhere where you can actually just be who you really are. I do feel that. I feel I can really be me here, and I always have done. So I think that actually Windhorse Evolution on a good day actually achieves all that. I think we are that kind of thing. We're not perfect, but I think we do actually meet those criteria. We do achieve it most of the time, I would say. This brings me to one of the kind of paramount principles of right livelihood, which is any right livelihood business, which is the love mode and not the power mode, the love mode. We need to operate in what's called the love mode. It's not always easy to do, not always easy to achieve in a right livelihood business. So what do I mean by these terms? So I'll just say a little bit about it. I've got a little quote here from Subhuti. He's talking about the 5 precepts in Sangharakshita, A New Voice. Here we go. The principle of violence is found only in the group, for the principle of love underlies the spiritual community. In going for refuge, and therefore taking on the 5 precepts, one is making a transition from operating by the principle of violence, what Sangharakshita calls the power mode, to operating by the principle of non-violence or the love mode. That transition does not, of course, take place all at once. However, when one goes for refuge, one dedicates oneself to living by the love mode as much as one possibly can. Power is the capacity to use force, violence being the actual use of that capacity to negate the being of another person. Every human being has some degree of power. Operating in the love mode means that, because of our imaginative identification with others, we refrain from using that power to negate the being of others. Indeed, we try to help them. The power mode, by definition, cannot be used within the spiritual community, since it is the absolute denial of Sangha. Outside the spiritual community, its members may at times use power to defend themselves. If they do find themselves in that position, power must always be subordinated to the love mode. So, the love mode is how we strive to relate within a right livelihood business, within the Sangha. There's a lot more I could say about that, but I will say that Windhorse Evolution is a right livelihood business. It's part of the Sangha. It's the Sangha at work. So our main principle of relating to each other at work is on the basis of the love mode. If we ever do have to use power, it always has to be within the service, primarily, of the love mode. It's not an easy thing to do in a business. There are all sorts of strains and push and pull and push and shove sometimes going on within a business. But that's the principle that we operate under. And sometimes it might seem quite frustrating. having to operate in that kind of way. Sometimes we might feel a bit frustrated about our business and its apparent inefficiencies, perhaps. We might see it like that. And that's kind of understandable. I can understand that. We might sometimes think, this business needs a bit of a shake-up. Yeah? Something needs to kind of really happen now. Immediately now. Backsides need to be kicked. Yeah? Something needs to happen. We might kind of think that on occasions. Yeah? And maybe that's true. Perhaps that is even true. But if it does, it has to happen with respect and fairness and metta and awareness. Yeah? It needs to happen in the form of the love mode. Shake-ups can happen, but they need to happen skillfully. They need to happen in the love mode. And it's a fundamental principle of right livelihood. Yeah? And we can't ever forget that. If we do forget that, then our business will become like an ordinary business. No matter how good that is or how profitable that is, it won't be a right livelihood business. So here's a little quote from Saddharaja. More and more, I see the spiritual life in terms of learning to switch from the power mode to the love mode. If we can do that, everything else will follow. So it's quite a different way of operating from Henry VIII. Yeah? It's quite a different way of operating from Colonel Gaddafi. And it's a different way of operating from that written by Niccolo Machiavelli. Buddhism also sees the workplace politics as also simply a manifestation of the 6 realms of existence as illustrated on the Tibetan Wheel of Life. And you can see workplace politics in this kind of way. So you've all got a little sheet of that. We've also got the image here, if you can actually see it. What's important about those 6 realms is they've got a positive counterpart, and that's worth remembering. You might think, oh yeah, 6 realms of existence, I know about all that. Yeah, I know about the 6 realms. I've looked, yeah, I know that. And maybe you do. Maybe you do know the 6 realms. But let's just have a little look again, because you might see something different there. You might see something new. Some of the symbols or the images might jump out at you again. Let's have a look. So at the top, we've got the God realm. And you know what's in there? There's gods. They are the superstars. Yeah? They are the privileged people. They are the blissful people, the popular people, the people with skills. There's a lot of money in that realm. Yeah, there's a lot of pride and vanity. There's a lot of beauty and colour. And, and popularity. Yeah, and within the workforce, that might actually mean gaining promotion or money. It might be getting some kind of pride or status. It's the kind of person who only wants the nice aspects of their job. Yeah? They're the special ones. They're the special ones in the God realm. A few years ago, I met one of these. I think I was about 19. I was working in a pub in the Lake District on a Saturday night. It was very, very busy. And this old man came in who was actually an old movie actor. Some of you might remember him. He was called Trevor Howard. Trevor Howard. He was in, his famous film was Brief Encounter and The Third Man. I've actually seen them, and he's okay, actually. He's quite good. But I didn't know who he was, and I had about a dozen people to serve at the bar. It was very busy, and he wasn't getting his drink quickly. He said, "Look here," he said, "do you realise who I am?" And I said, "I don't, actually. I don't know who you are. You're going to have to wait." And anyway, I did get chatting to him afterwards, and he bought me a drink. But it's clear that he was quite old, actually, but he still saw himself as some kind of god. And in terms of workplace politics, it's all about status, renown, position, and being top dog. So what the Buddha gives to the gods in the realm is he brings a lute. He's actually playing a little lute, a musical instrument. He's playing the melody of impermanence. And he's reminding them that they need to start striving. Yeah? Spiritual fruits only come about with effort. And you need to go forth from your position of emptiness and status. You need a bit more humility, actually, than that. You can lose your status and success. Yeah, your life needs to be based on something deeper, more permanent, than your current success. Let's talk a bit about the asuras that's next to them. They're also called the jealous gods or the demigods. And, well, they're characterized by jealousy and envy. Yeah, they want the wish-granting tree, which the gods have got. We've got all the goods. Well, this is what titans are like, yeah? Or asuras. They're highly competitive. They want things, they crave, they struggle and combat. They like fighting. Yeah, they like war and fighting. They're also cunning and manipulative. Yeah, and they like rigid hierarchy. That's quite interesting, isn't it? And at work, it really means, well, the kind of things I've been talking about, power politics at work, sticking your oar in, yeah, being a big hitter, yeah, that kind of stuff, getting your own way, turf wars, and the desire for status and to be rated by others. Yeah, so these sort of individuals are quite confrontational, and they can be bullies and manipulators at work. They can be quite Machiavellian. And what does the Buddha bring to that realm? He brings the sword of wisdom, which destroys ignorance, cuts through the delusion of their state, and sets them free from their vain attachment. In terms of workplace creativity, it's having the maturity to see that that kind of behaviour doesn't help you or anybody else. It's actually quite empty and neurotic. He who lives by the sword will die by the sword. That's what it says. Then we move on rapidly to the realm of the animals, and that's quite interesting because they're all about the basics of life. Yeah, we're talking about food, sleep, and sex. It's quite ignorant, quite blind. There's a lack of options and skills within that realm. Beings within that realm are quite vulnerable, actually. Their lives are quite vulnerable, and they're concerned mainly with the needs of the body. Actually, animals can be quite sophisticated. But they may even be intelligent, but they don't get the main thing. Yeah, they're quite limited in some way. They're plodders, they lack imagination, and they're unable to take responsibility. They're limited in their scope in some way. So in terms of workplace politics, they're just trying to survive at work. They're trying to keep their job, their employment, and they're often manipulated by others. They don't have much initiative or creativity. And what the Buddha gives the animals is the book, which represents education and developed culture. It represents developed skills. Yeah, it helps with opportunity, skills and confidence, and it gives you tools with which you can develop yourself. I'll say a little bit more, and then we'll move on. The realm of the hells is, well, we all know about the hells. It's very painful. It's about extreme thirst and hunger and pain, unimaginable suffering for eons of time. Unlike the Christian hells, it doesn't last forever. It runs out at some point and things get better. But it's not a good or enjoyable realm. There's nothing good there at all, really. And at work, this can take the form of being bullied or harassed or having to work with paranoid and neurotic colleagues. Yeah, the colleagues from hell. So in terms of workplace politics, it can be, it's a kind of dissatisfaction with your job. You really don't like your job. You don't want to go there. It's a negative, painful place for you to be. And millions of people in the world are like this. They don't like their work. It's an awful place, but they have to do it. What the Buddha brings to the hell beings is amrita, the divine nectar, which is a bit like ambrosia. Yeah, and it's actually another term for nirvana. Yeah, it's enlightenment. So the Buddha here is the healer. The Buddha's the healer, yeah? He's calming the fears, putting out the flames of the hell, and he's showing a better way of life. He's giving more options, more choices. In terms of workplace creativity, that means helping others at work in a real way, by empathizing with them, helping them, understanding them, and giving them more opportunities. Then we've got the realm of the hungry ghosts, or what's also called the praetors, and that's characterized by neurotic craving, yeah, and desire, the consumer mentality, and a lack of satisfaction. not getting what you want. Having a kind of empty, lacking kind of state going on there. And at work, this can manifest in terms of a constant neurotic desire for attention or to be appreciated by others. Yeah, you lack security in yourself, and you want something. You want something better. In terms of what the Buddha brings to the hungry ghosts, he brings them real food and drink. Yeah, organic, nourishing food. Yeah, with the right nutrients. A bit like a Windhorse lunch, really. Yeah, maybe a bit better than that, but it's pretty good. Yeah, and also he brings appropriate levels of security for people. He says, look, don't worry, you can actually stand on something quite solid there if you want to. And it's a wise acceptance and understanding that everything does change in life, and that's okay. That can be very good. We can change for the better. So in terms of workplace politics creativity, it means seeing the bigger picture from what you're seeing. Yeah, a much more healthy picture, accepting reality. Finally, we've got the realm of the humans, which is the best realm, the main realm for liberation. And it's about simple, dignified human beings with passion, desire for something better. It's the best realm for Dharma practice. And what you see people there practicing, you see them having families, travelling, entertaining themselves, and also they're working. They're doing their job. Yeah. Also the worldly winds are kind of battering them at different times. Yeah. They're working, they're interacting, they're socializing, they're buying, selling, meeting, and talking. And what the Buddha brings to this realm is a begging bowl and a staff with 3 rings, which is the insignia of the spiritual life itself. It's saying, yes, you're working, you're living your human life, but you can also have a spiritual life too. And human life and this opportunity is a really, really precious opportunity for you. And it means making the most of your work situation and what is really there, never taking it for granted, and attempting to improve that for yourself and for other people. So this is the traditional Buddhist view of the kind of worlds that we can inhabit. And the Buddha, going into those realms, symbolically giving to the beings in that realm, represents a clue for us on how we can work creatively ourselves within those particular kind of realms. It's a bit easy to get quite horrified by the realms, I've noticed. I mean, some of them are quite horrible. But I think it's important to remember that there's a really positive opportunity in each realm. And that's represented by the black path and the white path. There's always an opportunity to go up and grow and develop, as well as the opportunity to degenerate. Yeah, in any of those realms. It's very important. So I just want to say a few more things about how we work creatively with these realms, and then I'll conclude. So there's 3 practices I want to talk a little bit about. I'm not going to say very much, but I do want to outline them a little bit. And the first practice of how we work with workplace politics, given that we're in these kind of realms, is we need to learn to sail the worldly winds. You might think, oh yeah, worldly winds, they're quite in vogue at the moment, aren't they? We've got retreats like the urban retreat where we're looking at the worldly winds. And here they are. Here they are. Here's the worldly winds. Yeah. So we've got praise and blame, fame and infamy, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. And what we all want is praise, fame, gain and pleasure. That's what we want almost all the time. But it isn't what we always get, is it? It's a bit like my walk. You know, we were on the cliff tops and it was blowing. We were getting blown and we couldn't do anything about it. And life's like that. Sometimes we get praised, sometimes we get blamed. Yeah, you might all hate this talk that I'm giving at the moment and say it's rubbish. Or you might come to me afterwards and say, oh, it's fantastic. I've never heard anything so inspiring. I don't know what you're going to say. I'm prepared for that. That's okay. So, yeah, the worldly winds are blowing through us all the time. So we can make that a spiritual practice. And that's what's going on in relation to workplace politics. Workplace politics are just so much more wind. They're just blowing through businesses and institutions all the time. Yeah, and we need to accept that. We need to come to terms with that. And I strongly recommend Vajragupta's book on the worldly winds. It's quite cheap as well. It's a very, very good handbook on how to work with the worldly winds. So I'm not going to say too much about the worldly winds because he's got it all down there. It's all in there. But what I will say is there's a difference usually between how people ordinarily experience these winds and how Buddhists can learn to work with them. Because those winds are affecting every human being on the planet, whether we like it or not. We're getting these 8 winds all the time. But a lot of the time, we're desperate to have the good winds. And we're running scared of the bad winds, as it were. And this holds true of the harsh winds of workplace politics. So, you need to ground yourself. Yeah? You need to reduce your dependence on the good winds and your fear and loathing of the harsh winds. And you need to realise quite deeply that we need to experience these and let go. You need to reflect. And that's what I think you can learn to do. That's what sailing the worldly winds really is. Anyway, I won't say any more about that because I need to move on. But one thing I will say a little bit about is there's a very good example of, I think, the 8 worldly winds, which I came across recently, which was a couple of chaps that lived in Cambridge in the 1920s, called George Mallory and Andrew Irvine. They lived in Cambridge, they lived in Newnham and in Cambridge, and they attempted to climb Mount Everest in 1924, and they might have done it. You know, Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world, 29,000 feet. I'm sure they experienced a few winds when they were up there, but they also experienced an awful lot of pleasure and pain, loss and gain, fame and infamy in their attempt. What happened was in 1924, oxygen was just starting to get used in the climb on the assault on Everest. There they are with very early oxygen, and that's them setting off at 24,000 feet for the summit in 1924. They set off, just 2 men, and the gear that they had in those days, if you went over into the freebies box, you could find better gear in the freebies box than what they had to wear in those days. It was really rubbish. Yeah. They now think it's quite possible that they got to the top, because for 75 years they disappeared, were never seen again. For 75 years no one knew what happened to them. In 1999 an expedition went out there to see if they could find Mallory and Irvine, and they found Mallory, and they found him at 27,700 feet, and he'd fallen quite a long way, so he must have been on the summit. And they found him and he was completely frozen and perfectly preserved, and there he is. He was on the summit, just near the summit. They found his frozen body completely. Mallory. Fascinating, isn't it? So, he lost his life. A month ago they set out for a new expedition to find Irvine, and they think they know where he is, and he may have a camera on him. And the Kodak companies say that they could, if they took a photograph of themselves on the top, they do think they can still print that photograph after 85 years. Wow. Fascinating, isn't it? So, loss and gain, pleasure and pain, fame and infamy, and all that. They've got it infamy. And that's the worldly winds. I'll say a little bit more about this. The second practice was how to be an individual in the human realm. The second practice is to be an individual in the human realm. We saw in that realm that it's the best one for spiritual practice. Yeah? And that includes working for a living. Spiritual practice and working for a living are going on in that particular realm. And as we know, they can be combined. So it's important that we do become, when we're working, proper human beings, true human beings. The Sangharakshita calls this true individuality. And he gives a little list of what a true individual is. Here's your little list. I'm not going to say anything about it, I'll just give you the list. So just take this in. Think about this. Let this wash over. This is what a true individual is. Self-awareness, sense of responsibility, independence from the group, emotional positivity, self-confidence, energy, receptivity, ability to communicate, intelligence, gratitude, sensitivity, creativity, fidelity, imagination, empathy, aloneness, generosity, cooperativeness, willingness to forgive, willingness to confess and repent, and skillfulness. That's what a true individual is. Yeah, and that's quite a list, isn't it? It's quite. Apparently he's added a few more in recent years. But if we manage to just develop one or two of those qualities to a good degree, we will really notice the difference. And other people around us in our work teams will really notice the difference. Yeah? So this list gives you a taste of what it is to be a true individual. And one of the ways that we can develop this is within our own work teams. Teams give us an opportunity to do that, because there are times when teams can be like a group in the sense that there's a particular cultural behaviour or norm that goes on within that team. So there I was in the Slate Quarry, Carlisle United or Barrow FC. We need to know, where do you stand? This is kind of group behaviour. When I was 17, I wasn't able to say, well, actually, it doesn't really matter, does it? I don't care about football, and I'm not going to tell you. I didn't have the individuality in those days to do that. But if you want to be independent of the group, you want to work creatively with this kind of thing, you need a certain amount of independence from that group. Yeah? You cooperate with your team, you empathise, you're flexible, you're generous, you're receptive, you work hard, but you have a certain amount of independence from the group. You say, well, I know this is what you do, but I don't care about that. I'm not interested in it. I don't have to be part of that group behaviour. I'm not going to be. You can just simply opt out. And this is quite a principled approach. It's not easy to do. I don't think it's an easy path to do, but it requires strength of character. And people will respect you for it. People will always respect you if you have that. So lastly now, I'll say something about the third practice, letting go and experiencing emptiness. It's a similar practice to the worldly winds, but it really means noticing, being aware of yourself when you engage in workplace politics. So when you actually find yourself engaging in rivalry, or power play and status, or gossip, or manipulation, how does that feel? Being aware of that. And specifically it means being aware of before, during, and after. So sometimes something's going on at work and you get the urge to sort of get drawn in and tell a little story, a bit of gossip. You find yourself wanting to do, ooh, that'd be good, wouldn't it? I'll do that. Yeah, how does that feel? Or when you're actually gossiping or manipulating, how does it actually feel? And then also there's after you've done that, you've walked away from the situation, do you feel good about yourself? What are the effects of your behaviour? So this practice means really going in quite close and noticing yourself when you're engaging with those things. Was it satisfying? Did you get the results that you wanted? Do you feel good about yourself? Does the other person like you as a result? My guess is that if you really look at this, you'll find yourself feeling quite uncomfortable. And this is what happened to Niccolo Machiavelli. He regretted a lot of what he wrote. Yeah, he lived to regret. He regretted it on his deathbed. So letting go comes out of this experience, yeah? Really noticing, letting go of rivalry, letting go of gossip, letting go of manipulative behaviour. Yeah? And if you do this, you can start to experience a liberation, a pure heart and mind. Yeah? An ordinary, everyday liberation, a lightness of feeling. Well, I haven't done that. Like Arthur Prius said, he let go of the gossip. Yeah? So Sangharakshita, a little quote from Sangharakshita here. Perfect work comes from the unification of pure wisdom and pure deeds. Or, in the words of the great Buddhist teacher Ayakema, being nobody, going nowhere. So we can be nobody, going nowhere, and we can experience the wisdom from that, and seeing that rivalry, gossip, manipulation and status anxiety don't bring liberation. Yeah, but the equanimity, skillful speech, skillful action and true individuality do bring liberation. So these things are empty. These behaviours are empty. Yeah, they're worthless. And you'd be a fool to engage in rivalry and gossip. So these are the practices. And these are the suggestions. Sail the worldly winds, be an individual, and let go. So to conclude, this morning I've looked at the world of power and intrigue in the Tudor dynasty. Yeah, I've explored modern versions of that. I've defined workplace politics and its unattractive components, and I clarified the vision of what right livelihood can be. And we've also explored the 6 realms of existence, particularly in relation to workplace politics, and looked at their positive counterparts. Finally, I've outlined and explored 3 practices for workplace creativity. So now, all that remains is a short poem. It's a really beautiful poem, actually, from someone called Mr. William Blake. So really take it in, take the poem in. It's a beautiful, sweet little poem, full of meaning. And then I'll finish. Here we go, you ready? It's from the Auguries of Innocence. Man was made for joy and woe, and when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go. Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. Thank you.